an unprecedented drop in Canada's employment that is both unsurprising given the scale of the pandemic and the crisis, but still jaw-dropping.
These numbers are a punch in the gut. The unthinkable is happening. Ontario lost at least 400,000 jobs last month due to the fallout of this terrible virus. Sadly, these numbers are just the tip of the iceberg. They're just a snapshot of what we're dealing with. But these aren't just numbers. These are real people. People who are struggling out there. And it breaks my heart.
That's Ontario Premier Doug Ford echoing what we heard from political leaders in every province today. Over 1 million Canadians lost their job in March, just as COVID-19 was beginning to sweep this country. Almost half of those job losses, as you heard the Premier mention, were in Ontario. Another 2 million Canadians saw their hours reduced by at least half. And take a look at your screen right now, because that's by far the worst month for job losses. This, by far, I should say, is the worst month for job losses on record. And it's likely to get worse than this because the data is only based on the week of March 15th, when, as you'll remember, the crisis was really just getting underway here. So what does that all mean for the road ahead? Frances Donald is the Global Chief Economist with Manulife Financial. She joins us from Montreal. And Trevor Tombe is an Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Calgary. I believe he's in Calgary. Good to see you both. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having us.
Ms. Donald, I want to start with you because you, I believe, were the one that tweeted that chart, and it circulated our newsroom today that shows just the absolute drop-off after you look at years of various fluctuations in employment in this country. Can you contextualize for us and for our viewers just how historic what we're witnessing is?
That's right. This isn't just the worst jobs number we've seen in our modern economic history. It's 8 times worse than even the worst months that we had in 2009. But it does illustrate an important component of this recession, which looks so much different than what we've seen historically. And that is that we're probably experiencing what might take a year for a typical economy to lose in terms of jobs in a very compressed period of time. So not only is this data point the worst we've seen on record, but I suspect almost every data point we're going to get over the next several months, whether it's related to how much we spend or what housing markets are doing, is going to look, unfortunately, very similar.
Yeah, and Professor Tombe, I wanted to ask you as well about this because I looked and noticed immediately that the data, and StatsCan was very careful to point it out, was from the week of March 15th to the 21st. And I think back to that, and it was just a couple days before then. It seems like a lifetime now. But a couple days before then, the government was saying you can no longer travel, for example. It's not a good idea to travel. That was just the beginning. What does that mean for these data points going forward, do you think?
So it was just the beginning, and we should remember that the labor force survey is a survey, as the name implies. So StatsCan is literally contacting Canadians and going through a questionnaire with them. And that week of March 15th was when the health crisis was really just starting. And so we won't know the full scale and depth of the implications of COVID-19 and the public health measures on the labor market until the beginning of May, when we get the data for April. So that's important to keep in mind. But even despite that, the scale of the drop that we saw, not just unprecedented in terms of recent history, but larger than ever in recorded economic history, as far back as the Great Depression. The drop that we saw in March of about 5.3% is roughly twice as large as the worst employment drop, monthly drop in the Great Depression. So it's definitely unprecedented. That word is appropriate here.
Ms. Donald, we've seen since then a number of statistics come from the government, or at least numbers that they're putting out daily now, about how many people are accessing, for example, the CERB or accessing it through an EI application. It looks like in total they're nearing about 5 million. Is that a better picture right now, I guess, or an accurate portrayal of even how many more people have lost their jobs?
Well, it certainly gives us a better feel than data that looks back over a month. But the silver lining when I see that is that unlike in these prior recessions, we have government support that has stepped in very aggressively. One of the challenges with this number is that as much as we think over the next 6 months, we hope that many of these individuals will be rehired. There is a questioning amongst economists is whether or not those wage subsidies that were retroactively applied will mean that some of these 1 million are actually rehired back in short order. That's a hope, but all we have to go on right now is those CERB applications, and they suggest to us that this really is the tip of the iceberg, that there are millions of Canadians who are suffering and looking for support from the government.
Professor Toom, on the two sort of packages that the government put forth, the CERB, which is aimed at helping individuals who lost all their income. It doesn't cover at this point, though the Prime Minister says eventually something will, people who have lost some of their income or most of their income, but not all. And then the wage subsidy program. Do you think those are going to be effective?
So I think these are not the end of what governments across the country, provincial and federal, are going to be rolling out. I think they've done a phenomenal job rolling out support as quickly as they can, but we shouldn't view this as the end. And we see from one day to the next, the federal government and provincial governments are changing and adapting their programs. I think these are very important at a situation like this because the contraction in employment and the reduction in economic activity is a choice we're making to combat the spread of the virus, to prevent much more catastrophic and significant health and economic implications down the line. So these programs to bridge people through the crisis are very important to provide income to families, credit to businesses, to try and, to the extent possible, maintain worker and firm connections. And we saw some indication of that in this data. So we look at the number of people flowing into unemployment in March, and the overwhelming majority of individuals flowing into unemployment are in the form of temporary layoffs. So the number of permanent layoffs is not actually that much different than what we saw in March of last year. So that's some early, I guess, hopeful indications that we will be able to recover once we get through the crisis.
And just to give our viewers a quick indication, you'll see on the corner of your screen there, the President of the United States is giving an update on the spread of coronavirus in Washington and in the country at large. We will head there in a few minutes to see what he has to say, because there is some word that there could be movement on the oil price front where Russia and Saudi Arabia are concerned. But I just want to get a few more minutes with Ms. Donald and Professor Toom. And Ms. Donald, when it comes to what might come next from the government, what would your prescription be?
Well, one of my concerns is that while we're all hopeful that everyone will be back to work in a matter of weeks or months, there is some concern that rehiring activity will be a lot slower than layoffs. And many of these programs are designed to, as Professor Toom noted, bridge the gap. But my concern is the gap may actually end up being a lot longer than some of these better case scenarios. So I'm thinking about, even as we relax some of that social distancing at some point in the future and we see a good chunk of labor rehired, there is going to be a segment of this population that is left behind on the other side, and they're going to need support as well. So now it's not just about mitigating in the next couple of months. It's about thinking about who's going to need help 6 months from now, and will we have the policies to support them as well?
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much to both of you for your time this evening and your insights. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
It's Frances Donald, Global Chief Economist with Manulife Financial, and Trevor Toom, an Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Calgary. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.